Time my sister's rehearsal dinner rolled around, Holloway Auto had already cleared $340,000 in contracts that year. I didn't tell my mother that when she called to say I wasn't invited. She didn't ask. She just said, "Kimberly, you know how important this weekend is for your sister. All of Ryan's family is flying in from Connecticut. His father went to Yale. His mother chairs the hospital board." She paused. "You understand what I'm saying, sweetheart?" I did. I understood exactly. "My name is Kimberley O.C. I'm 31 years old. I own a 6-bay auto repair shop in Decatur, Georgia, and I have grease that lives permanently in the creases of my knuckles, no matter how hard I scrub. My sister Vanessa is 34, a healthcare consultant, and she was marrying into the kind of family that had a different relationship with dirt than we did." "I understand," I told my mother. And I hung up and sat in my office, which is really just a converted supply closet with a secondhand desk and a whiteboard covered in scheduling, and I stared at the calendar on the wall for a long time. I'd been circling that weekend in my head for months, not because I planned some elaborate scene, just because I thought that at some point, somebody in my family might realize that inviting your own daughter to a rehearsal dinner was, at minimum, the decent thing to do. They did not realize this. Let me back up. My father came to the United States from Ghana in 1987. He got a job at a dealership in Atlanta, washing cars, worked his way into the service bay, and eventually became the best diagnostic mechanic in the shop. People drove an hour to have my dad look at their engine. He had a gift for listening to a car the way some people listen to music. He heard things no one else caught. I grew up in that shop on weekends and summers. My dad never pushed me toward it. He just never locked the door. My sister Vanessa wanted nothing to do with any of it. She was straight A's, honor society, Emory University, then consulting. My parents were so proud of her they practically glowed. My mother put Vanessa's acceptance letter in a frame, an actual frame. It's still on the wall of their living room in Smyrna. I went to Georgia State, studied business, came back and worked with my dad, learned everything he knew, and when he retired at 62 because his knees finally gave out, I bought the shop from him for fair market value. Because he raised me to do things right, not to take what wasn't offered. That was 3 years ago. In those 3 years, I'd grown from 2 bays to 6. I'd hired 4 full-time mechanics and 2 front desk staff. I'd signed fleet maintenance contracts with a local courier company, a property management firm, and a catering company that serviced corporate events across metro Atlanta. My family knew I had a shop. What they imagined when they heard auto shop was something very specific, and it was not what I had actually built. My mother thought I was doing something noble but modest, like running a corner store. She would sometimes tell people at church that I was working with cars, the way you might say someone was between opportunities. My brother-in-law Ryan-to-be, at that point, had met me exactly once, at Christmas 2 years prior. He shook my hand and said, "That's cool that you do that," the same way you'd say it to a kid who told you they collected stamps. Vanessa never corrected any of this. She never called and said, "Kim's shop is actually doing really well." She never mentioned the second location I was scouting. She never said anything. And in fairness, I never pushed her to. I was busy. I had a business to run. But I was still her sister, and when she got engaged last spring, I sent her flowers and a card and called her the same night. She was happy, distracted, already in planning mode. She told me about the venue, a historic estate outside of Roswell, and the guest list, and Ryan's parents and their expectations. And somewhere in that conversation, she said, almost as an aside, "I'm going to have you at the bridal shower, of course." Of course, as though that were generous. I let it go. I told her I loved her and I'd be there. 2 weeks before the rehearsal dinner, my mother called. I've already told you how that went. What I haven't told you is what happened in the 3 weeks that followed. The Monday after my mother's call, I was going through the week's scheduling when my operations manager, a woman named Bernadette, who has run front of house for me since year 1, and who has strong opinions about everything from tire rotation intervals to my personal life, dropped a contract folder on my desk. "Corporate account," she said, "came through the website Saturday." I opened it. Piedmont Elite Event Services. They managed logistics for high-end corporate gatherings across North Atlanta. They had a fleet of 16 vehicles, cargo vans, SUVs, a few sedans, and they needed a new service provider because their previous shop had closed. They were offering a contract worth roughly $8,000 a month in routine maintenance alone, with additional fees for emergency callouts. I called them that afternoon, spoke with their logistics coordinator, a man named Douglas who had a very businesslike voice and a habit of saying "moving forward" at the start of every sentence. We signed the contract the following Friday. I mention this only because Piedmont Elite was the company handling logistics for the rehearsal dinner at the Roswell estate. I did not know this when I signed. I found out 6 days later when Douglas emailed to confirm our first scheduled maintenance run and mentioned, as a courtesy, that they had a major event that weekend, the Hargrove Thyssen wedding rehearsal, and wanted to make sure all vehicles were serviced beforehand. He included the venue address so I could prioritize the right fleet vehicles. I read that email 3 times. The Hargrove Thyssen wedding. My mother's maiden name is Hargrove. Vanessa Hargrove was marrying Ryan Thyssen. I sat with this information for about an hour. I called Bernadette in and showed her the email. She looked at it, looked at me, and said, "Well, yeah," I said. "Moving forward," she said, mocking Douglas's cadence. "What do you want to do?" I thought about it. The honest answer is that there was a version of me that wanted to call my mother right then. To say, "Do you know who's servicing the vans for Vanessa's rehearsal dinner? Do you have any idea?" But that version of me was 23, not 31. I'd outgrown her mostly. "We fulfilled the contract," I said. "Same as any client." We serviced all 16 Piedmont vehicles over the course of that week. My guys did excellent work, as they always do. I signed off on the final checklist myself the morning of the rehearsal dinner. I wasn't at the dinner. Let me be clear about that. I wasn't invited. I didn't invite myself. And I have no interest in crashing events where I'm not wanted. That's not who I am. What happened came to me secondhand from my cousin Tanya, who was at the rehearsal dinner and who texted me at 9:47 that evening with the message, "Douglas from the valet company just told Ryan's dad that Holloway Auto has been servicing their whole fleet for a month and that the owner is the best shop in Decatur. They looked it up on their phones right there at the table. Kim." She followed it with approximately 11 exclamation points and 3 crying laughing emojis. I was at home. I had made myself salmon and roasted broccoli and was watching a documentary about the interstate highway system, which I find genuinely interesting and other people find baffling. I read Tanya's text and I felt something complicated move through me. Not triumph, exactly. More like vindication with a little bit of grief in it. My phone rang 20 minutes later. It was Ryan's father. His name was Charles Thyssen. He was polite, measured, clearly a man who had spent decades being the most important person in every room he entered. He introduced himself formally, which I appreciated. He said, "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Douglas from Piedmont passed along your number. I wanted to reach out directly." I told him it was fine. He said, "My wife and I have been looking for a new service provider for our personal vehicles for some time. We have 3 cars, a BMW 7 Series, an Audi Q7, and my wife's Range Rover. Our previous mechanic retired last year. Douglas speaks very highly of your shop." We talked for about 20 minutes. He asked smart questions. I gave him straight answers. By the end of the call, he said he'd like to bring all 3 vehicles in the following week. "One more thing," he said, just before hanging up. "My daughter-in-law-to-be. Her last name is Hargrove. Is she any relation?" "She's my sister," I said. There was a pause, a real one, not a polite one. "Is that right?" he said. Not a question, more like a man quietly reorganizing something in his mind. "It is," I said. "Well," he said, "I look forward to meeting you in person." My mother called me the next morning at 7:15. I was already at the shop. I had a Subaru on the lift and a fleet van waiting, and I'd been up since 5:30. I answered because I always answer her calls, even when I'm not sure I should. She started with small talk, which told me everything. My mother does not do small talk. She goes directly to the point in every situation. If she was starting with, "How have you been sleeping?" and "Is it very hot there this week?" she was building up to something. I let her build. Finally, she said, "Charles Thyssen called Ryan last night. He said he spoke with you." "He did," I said. He asked Ryan why he didn't know you owned a successful business. I didn't say anything. Ryan didn't have an answer, she said, and then Ryan asked her sister and she… My mother stopped. I could hear her moving around her kitchen, the sound of her ceramic mug on the granite counter. She didn't have a good answer either. Mom, I said, what is it you want to say? There was a long pause. My mother is not a woman who apologizes easily. She was raised by people who believed that if you were doing your best according to your understanding, you didn't owe anyone an apology for the gaps in that understanding. It's a philosophy I've watched cause damage my entire life. I should have asked more questions, she said. That was the closest she could get that morning. It wasn't enough, and we both knew it. But it was real, and that counted for something. You didn't ask any, I said. Not cruelly, just as a fact. No, she said, I didn't. She asked if she could come see the shop. She came on a Tuesday, which is usually a moderate day for us, busy enough that she could see the operation moving, not so slammed that I couldn't step away for a few minutes. I told Bernadette my mother was coming, and Bernadette, who has met my mother once and formed a complete opinion, said, I'll make sure the good coffee is out. My mother drove herself. She's 63, still drives a Camry she's had for 11 years, and she pulled into the lot and sat in her car for what Bernadette later told me was a full 4 minutes before getting out. I showed her around. I showed her the 6 bays, each one occupied. I showed her the parts inventory system, the scheduling software, the fleet maintenance logs. I showed her the wall in my office where I keep the contracts, the courier company, the property management firm, the catering outfit, and now Piedmont Elite, and, newly, the Thyssen family vehicles. She looked at the contracts for a long time. Your father knew, she said. Dad always knew, I said. He just didn't make it a point to tell you. She looked at me. I looked back. There's a whole conversation in that exchange that we've been having for 20 years, about what my father shared with her versus what he kept between us, about the way the shop was always slightly separate from the family in her mind, a thing my dad did that she tolerated rather than shared. I'm proud of you, she said. She said it like it cost her something, which, for her, it did. That's not a criticism. That's just who she is. Thank you, I said. I meant it. The wedding was in September, at the estate in Roswell that Vanessa had described on the phone all those months ago. I was invited. Full ceremony, reception, the whole thing. My mother called to tell me personally, in a separate call from the logistics email Vanessa sent, which I thought was meaningful. Vanessa called me the week before the wedding. We were on the phone for an hour and a half, which is the longest we'd talked since probably college. She apologized. Not the kind of apology that is really a justification, I'm sorry you felt excluded, but a plain one. I should have stood up for you. I didn't. I'm sorry. I asked her why she hadn't. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think I was embarrassed by how much I wanted them to like me. And I convinced myself that you not being there was just logistics. Easier. And I knew that wasn't true, and I did it anyway. That's the most honest thing my sister has ever said to me. Maybe the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me about what happened. It didn't fix everything. It didn't undo the phone call from my mother or the years of working with cars at church. But it was real, and I could work with real. Okay, I said. Okay, she said. Yeah, I said. Okay, we'll figure it out. The wedding was beautiful. The estate had this long, oak-lined driveway that made you feel for a moment like you'd stepped into a different century. The flowers were all white and pale green, and the light that afternoon was the golden kind that only happens in Georgia in September, that particular slant that makes everything look like it's been shot through amber. I wore a navy dress I bought 3 weeks before because I'd put off shopping, which is a recurring theme in my life. Charles Thyssen found me during cocktail hour. He was exactly what I expected. Tall, silver-haired, the kind of composed that comes from decades of being told you're the smartest person in the room and eventually just believing it. But he looked at me with something I hadn't expected, which was genuine respect. The Range Rover, he said by way of greeting. The auxiliary battery connector, I said. It was causing the start-stop system to misfire. He laughed. My last shop charged me $400 and told me it was a software issue. It's never a software issue when it's a connector, I said. His wife joined us, a woman named Patricia. I checked my list. No, that name was taken. Her name was. I'll call her Judith, because that's what it was. Judith had the kind of handshake that meant she'd been in professional spaces her whole life, firm and brief. "We've been telling everyone about your shop," she said. "I appreciate that," I said. "You should come to our foundation's gala in November," she said. "We do a dinner for about 300 people. I'd love to introduce you to some people." She handed me a card. I took it. My sister found me later in the evening, near the end of the reception, when the band had switched to slower songs and people were drifting toward the edges of the tent in comfortable pairs. She came and stood next to me and we looked out at the dance floor together for a minute without saying anything. "Happy?" I asked. "So happy," she said. She sounded like she meant it. "Good," I said, and I meant that too. She leaned her head against my shoulder for just a second, the way she used to do when we were kids, and she was tired and not too proud to show it. "I'm going to do better," she said. "I know," I said. "I mean it." "I know you do," I said. "That's why I said I know." She laughed a little. I did too. The Monday after the wedding, I was back in the shop at 6:45. I had a fleet van overdue for a brake inspection, a BMW 7 Series coming in for its first service under the new account, and a full week of scheduling to review. Bernadette had already started the coffee and was reorganizing the intake forms for the third time since we'd switched systems, which is just how she processes stress. I stood in the bay for a minute before the day started. Concrete floor, fluorescent light, the smell of oil and metal that I have known my entire life. My dad built the version of this place that he could build. I built the version of this place that he could build. Somewhere in the middle is everything he taught me. I thought about my mother standing in this room looking at the contract wall. I thought about my sister on the phone saying, "I should have stood up for you without any decoration around it." I thought about Charles Thisson laughing about a battery connector. And I thought about what I'd said to my mother on the phone that first morning, "You didn't ask any." Not as a weapon, just as a true thing. Because this is what I've learned about doing work that people don't see. You don't need them to see it while you're doing it, you just need to do it. The visibility comes later, or it doesn't, and either way the work is there. The contracts are there. The bays are full. The shop smelled like it always smells. My guys started arriving at 7, the BMW pulled in at 9. I picked up my clipboard and went to work. I keep thinking about the moment my mother stood in front of that contract wall and said, "Your father knew." Not, "I'm so proud." Not, "I had no idea." Just, "Your father knew." Like the knowing had been in the room all along, and she was only now walking into it. There's something I've come to understand about the way consequences work. Not as punishment, not as karma in any mystical sense, just as the plain arithmetic of choices over time. My mother chose, for years, to ask no questions. My sister chose to say nothing when something should have been said. And those choices didn't disappear. They just accumulated quietly, the way debt does, until one Tuesday afternoon when my mother sat in a converted supply closet and looked at a wall covered in contracts and had to reckon with the math. That's how it actually works, not lightning from the sky. Just the slow, patient return of what you put into the world. What I did, and I don't say this with any pride, because it wasn't strategy, it was just survival, was keep my integrity intact when there was no immediate reward for doing so. I bought the shop from my dad at fair market value when I could have negotiated something softer. I serviced Piedmont's fleet to the same standard I would any account, even after I realized those were the vans pulling up to my sister's rehearsal dinner. I didn't call my mother to say, "Do you know what I'm doing right now?" I just did the work. That's the only thing I know how to call doing right by yourself. Making the choice you'd be comfortable explaining out loud, even when no one's watching. The intelligence part, and I mean that not as book smarts but as the ability to read a situation clearly and respond to what's actually there, came from my dad. He taught me to listen to a problem before I decided what was wrong with it. That applies to engines. It also applies to people. When Vanessa called me the week before her wedding and said, "I should have stood up for you," without any cushioning around it, I heard the real thing underneath. She wasn't performing remorse. She was ashamed. And shame, when it's honest, deserves a real response, not a wall. So I said, "Okay, Not because I'd forgotten what happened, but because I understood it. That's different. The third thing, the stubbornness, the refusal to stop when it would have been easier to stop. That one I can't explain as neatly. There were mornings in year one when I had 2 bays and 1 mechanic and a scheduling system that was literally a whiteboard and a dry erase marker. Nobody was writing articles about me. Nobody was watching. I kept going because the work was real. And real work is its own reason. Bernadette told me once, on a slow Wednesday, when we were both tired and a little frustrated, "You know what your problem is? You actually care whether the car leaves here fixed." She meant it as a complaint. I took it as a compliment. That's the whole story, I think. Not that I won something. Not that my family came around in some dramatic, cinematic way. Just that I did the work. I stayed honest. I kept thinking clearly about what was actually in front of me. And eventually, the distance between who I was and who they thought I was became impossible to ignore. The shop smells like oil and metal every morning when I walk in. It smelled that way when my dad ran it. It'll probably smell that way long after I'm gone. That's enough for me.